I only needed shelter, but that silent clapper was hiding my family's unfinished story.
No home, no savings, no one answering her calls, just a canvas tool bag and $6 she had hidden inside its torn lining. And with that $6, she bought a forgotten brass ship's bell foundry outside Canton, Norfolk County, Massachusetts, erased from county maps in 1978. Half the north roof had fallen inward. The furnace chimney leaned 6 inches toward the yard. The county condemned it on October 3, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But inside the heaviest bronze clapper, behind a threaded cap no hand had opened in decades, waited a sealed chamber that would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Elena Marlowe had been listening her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Quincy, she learned the difference between a house at rest and one holding its breath. Her father vanished before she could remember his shoes by the door, and her mother kept them moving through apartments where radiators knocked after midnight. Elena became the child who noticed loose hinges, dripping traps, and which floorboards warned before they broke. June Marlowe worked double shifts in a hospital laundry and carried exhaustion like a folded sheet. She loved her daughter in practical measures, bus fare in a jar, soup divided for 2 nights, a coat bought large. But when fear entered a room, June made herself small enough to survive it. The one person who taught Elena not to shrink was her grandfather, Silas Marlowe, a retired bell founder with square fingertips and a crescent scar below his left thumb. Every Saturday he took her to a rented shed near the Neponset River, where he repaired handbells and kept foundry ledgers wrapped in waxed cloth. Elena swept bronze filings into a coffee tin while he showed her how a bell confessed its weakness before it cracked. A dull patch under the knuckle, a tremor in the rim, a note that died too soon. At noon, they ate rye bread and apples beside the furnace as he drew mold sections on brown paper. Brick core, horsehair clay, false bell, outer cope, each line slow enough to make precision feel like care. Never strike harder than the metal can answer, Silas told her. He meant bells, but also people. Elena understood only the first meaning then. He died during her second year of college, 3 days after a stroke took his speech. The shed lease expired before she returned from exams. Its ledgers were ruined by rain, the patterns burned, the tools sold in a mixed lot. June saved only Silas's canvas bag, saying there was no room for relics. Elena carried it anyway. At 21, she met Adrian Vale in a campus business incubator. He wore pale shirts without wrinkles and spoke softly enough that people leaned closer. He praised Elena's designs for affordable marine safety hardware, then began correcting her in meetings, changing passwords for efficiency, and moving supplier calls to his private phone. He never shouted. He simply arranged each room until her own work seemed to belong to him. Their company lasted 14 months. One September morning, Elena found the operating account emptied, the tax reserve gone, and 2 loans transferred through documents bearing her electronic signature. Adrian's apartment was vacant. His number was dead. By noon, the bank had frozen her account. By Friday, an investigator was explaining the penalties for falsified loan records. The eviction came October 18th. Her landlord set Silas's canvas bag on the hallway tile as though it were damp. A brass zipper tooth had torn loose and Elena pressed it flat while he read the notice. June stood 3 steps below, holding Elena's spare key. She had guaranteed the rent when the company began. Now she would not meet her daughter's eyes. You need to leave before the locksmith arrives. Exactly 8 words delivered without anger. Elena looked at her mother. June placed the key on the stair rail, not in Elena's hand, then walked toward the laundry bus waiting at the curb. Its folding door closed between them. Elena remained with 1 bag, $6 hidden in its lining, and the sound of a new deadbolt sliding from its box. For 6 weeks, she stayed close enough to Boston to answer court notices. 2 nights, she slept upright at South Station until security moved her along. In Brockton, she hid behind pallets near a closed garden center and woke with frost on the bag. In Stoughton, a church basement offered mats on Mondays but not Tuesdays. She spent 90 cents on oatmeal, $1.10 on a bus, then stopped buying coffee because it warmed her hands for too little time. $12 became $9, then $7. The final $6 remained untouched because Silas had said a small last measure still mattered. She washed in library restrooms and read legal forms beneath fluorescent lights. Each afternoon, she searched public computers for temporary work and rooms requiring no deposit. At the Canton Public Library on a rain-dark Thursday, a classified listing appeared beneath municipal surplus notices. Abandoned industrial parcel, historic bell foundry, structure unsafe. Quit claim transfer, $6 plus recording. The photograph showed a roof collapsed under walnut branches and a square furnace chimney leaning against a white sky. On the gable, almost buried by soot, was a cast brass emblem shaped like a ship's bell. Elena read the listing 3 times, then checked the bus schedule. The fare would consume nearly everything else she had, but the deed price matched the money Silas had taught her not to dismiss. She closed the browser, put both hands around the canvas bag, and stood. By dusk, Elena was walking toward the station with $6, a dead man's tools, and an address the county had already decided to erase. The first bus left South Station before sunrise, its windows filmed with old rain and the breath of passengers who had nowhere pleasant to be. Elena rode 21 miles to Route 138, changed near Stoughton, and spent her last folded bill reaching Canton Center. From there, the directions on the county notice became less certain. 3 miles south-west at the old viaduct, then follow the river road until the pavement narrowed. Her shoes leaked before noon. That night, still 4 miles short of town, she slept beneath loose hay in an open-sided barn while the temperature fell to 28 degrees. Mice worked quietly somewhere above her head. At daybreak, she brushed straw from Silas's canvas bag and followed Sherman Street toward Canton. The town appeared in useful pieces. Hagen's Hardware with galvanized pails in the window, Dwyer's Cafe breathing bacon steam onto the sidewalk, Bellotti Pharmacy beneath a green awning, a narrow shop called Canton Shoe Repair, and the Norfolk County Credit Union occupying a brick building that looked too warm to enter. Elena passed all 5 without stopping. The clerk's office stood behind the town hall in a lower annex of brown stone. Inside, the air smelled of paper dust and radiator heat. A brass clock clicked above a counter divided by wire glass. The woman behind it had white hair twisted around a pencil and a nameplate that read, Mrs. Ruth Pemberton, Land Records. She studied Elena's wet coat, then the bag, then the $6 laid carefully on the counter. You are here for the Revere parcel. So yes, ma'am. Mrs. Pemberton drew a folder from beneath her desk. You understand the county makes no warranty. Yes, ma'am. You understand the structure is condemned. Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no water service. Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition fees become yours upon transfer. Elena looked at the deed. The parcel description ran through bounds marked by a granite post, a disused mill channel, and a walnut tree measuring 32 inches across when surveyed in 1947. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Pemberton removed the pencil from her hair and pointed to 3 lines. Elena signed each one. The clerk pressed a brass recording stamp into a red pad, then brought it down with both hands. The impact sounded heavier than $6 should have sounded. You will take Sherman South, she said. Turn onto Neponset Street after the rail bridge. At the split, keep left on Revere Lane. The lane becomes dirt. The foundry is beyond the second stone wall. She began fastening the documents with a black ribbon, then stopped. Marlowe, she said. Elena raised her eyes. Mrs. Pemberton opened a lower drawer and removed an index card browned along its top edge. Silas Marlowe filed research requests here, bell patents, probate inventories, foundry transfers, every winter for 11 years. He was my grandfather. The pencil remained still between the clerk's fingers. He told me he had worked in foundries. He did more than work in them. Mrs. Pemberton turned the card toward Elena. Silas's handwriting filled both sides in compact blue lines. He believed one branch of his family had been connected to this place after the Revere works closed. Not owners, perhaps, pattern makers or finishers. He never found the deed that proved it. Elena touched the edge of the card but did not lift it. Why did he stop coming? The last request was dated February 2009. Mrs. Pemberton's voice softened by 1 degree. He said he was running out of time. Silas had died that spring. The clerk folded the recorded deed into a thick envelope and slid the index card inside with it. County property records are public. No one will object if this accompanies them. Elena thanked her. Mrs. Pemberton opened the cash drawer, placed $5 into the town's receipt tray, then held the final dollar between 2 fingers. Recording requires the full amount, but the register can wait until Monday. She tucked the bill beneath her blotter. Outside, the rain had stopped. Elena followed the directions past the rail bridge where brown water moved beneath granite arches. Revere Lane climbed between stone walls furred with moss. A man in an orange cap watched from the steps of a gray farmhouse while his black and white dog barked once, decided against a second effort, and lay down again. Beyond them, bare walnut trees leaned over the road like people reading something on the ground. The Foundry emerged slowly. Its main block was built of soot-dark brick, approximately 40 feet long and 26 feet wide, with a timber casting shed attached at the rear. The north roof had collapsed across 3 rafters. The remaining shingles were curled like burnt paper. A square chimney rose from the furnace wall, leaning toward an overgrown yard where bronze slag shone green beneath wet leaves. Above the double doors hung a wooden sign. Revere Marine Bell Works, the faded letters said. Someone had painted closed beneath them long ago, but rain had nearly erased the word. Elena fitted the county key into the padlock. It turned only after she warmed the cylinder between her palms and worked it back and forth. The doors separated with the sound of timber pulling free from ice. Cold metal met her first, a taste on the tongue before the room became visible. Daylight entered through the broken roof and lay in narrow bars across the floor. Her boot disturbed a skin of black dust that smelled of charcoal, wet brick, and something mineral, almost bitter. The front room had once been used for finishing. A long lathe stood beneath the windows, its belt stiff and furred with mold. Bell forms rested against one wall. Clay cores split open, iron templates shaped like half-profiles, and a wooden strickleboard worn smooth where hands had guided it through circles. When Elena touched the bench, soot clung to her fingers with the softness of flour. A loose pane tapped in the wind. Behind a warped partition, the casting room opened around the furnace. Its arched mouth was filled with collapsed fire brick. A pouring shank lay on the floor beside 2 crucible tongs long enough for 3 men to hold. Near the sand pit, ship's bells sat in different stages of abandonment. One cracked through its crown, another green with oxidation, a third blackened but complete. Elena struck the smallest bell with her knuckle. The note was thin, but it traveled. It moved through the empty rooms into the chimney and back again as a low answering hum. Somewhere behind the furnace wall, a fragment of metal responded. She stood very still. By afternoon, she had chosen a dry strip of floor beneath the south wall. She swept it with a broken casting brush, laid flattened burlap over the boards, and used Silas's canvas bag as a pillow. Hunger sharpened every smell from Dwyer's Cafe, though the town lay more than a mile away. At dusk, she found a rain barrel behind the shed and strained the water through a clean corner of her shirt. It tasted faintly of leaves and iron. She ate the final half of a cracker saved from the bus, then buttoned her coat to the throat. Darkness gathered without electric light to resist it. The building settled around her. One timber ticking as it cooled, water dropping into a bucket, wind pressing and releasing the damaged roof. Near midnight, something rolled once across the casting room floor and stopped. Elena opened her eyes. The sound had come from the largest bronze clapper, lying beneath the workbench like a sleeping weight. Its surface was dark, almost black, except for a narrow circle at one end where the oxidation changed. She did not rise to inspect it, not yet. The strongest sound does not come from shouting, but from what has been carefully made to ring true. By the 3rd morning, Elena knew which boards complained beneath her weight and which stayed quiet. The well behind the casting shed produced clear water after 12 strokes of its rusted handle, though she boiled every cup. The outhouse leaned toward the stone wall but remained usable once she replaced its broken latch with bent copper wire. She learned the Foundry by sound. The south room creaked twice before dawn. The timber beside the furnace answered rain with a low pop. One loose slate scratched across the roof whenever the wind came from the river. The largest clapper beneath the workbench made no sound at all. On the fourth day, Elena walked back into Canton carrying a list written on the reverse of the condemnation notice. Hagen's hardware smelled of pine shelving, machine oil, and the bitter dust of fertilizer sacks. The owner stood behind the counter sorting screws into glass jars. He was a broad man with a white mustache stained yellow at one corner and a magnifying lens clipped to his spectacles. "Foundry girl," he said without looking up, "Elena Martin Hagen." She placed the list before him. "I cannot pay for everything today." Martin read it slowly, scratching his mustache with the wooden end of a pencil. "You have employment, not a collateral?" "A condemned building." He looked through the front window toward the wet street, then opened a ledger bound in cracked red cloth. "I can give you 30 days, he said. "After that, you pay something every Friday. $1 counts, silence does not." Elena nodded. He wrote, "Marlowe, Revere Lane," at the top of a page and handed her a thin manual with a water-damaged cover. "Home repairs without contractors," he said, printed in 1968. "The roof chapter lies, but the chimney chapter is decent." Her purchases came to less than $30, a wire chimney brush for $7.40, 20 feet of rope for $3.25, a galvanized bucket for $4.10, work gloves for $2.80, a box of masonry nails for $3.60, and 2 pounds of dried beans for $1.45. Martin rounded nothing down. Instead, he wrote each price carefully in the ledger so the debt would remain honest. Back at the foundry, Elena began with the chimney. The opening above the furnace was too narrow for her shoulders, so she climbed the rear ladder carrying the brush, rope, and a stone wrapped in burlap. The upper courses had shifted, leaving powdered mortar between bricks. She tied the stone beneath the brush, lowered both through the flue, then pulled upward in short strokes while standing with one boot braced against the ridge. Black creosote rose in clouds from below. It coated her face, entered her sleeves, and gathered in the corners of her mouth with a taste like burnt pennies. Twice the brush caught. The second time she had to lie across the roof and work the rope sideways until a nest of twigs, feathers, and hardened soot broke loose and fell through the chimney with a heavy sigh. She worked 4 hours from above and 3 from below, sweeping the flue until a hand mirror held inside the furnace throat showed a pale square of winter sky. The next morning, she cleaned the firebox and rebuilt a shallow bed from the least damaged fire brick. She carried dead walnut limbs from the stone wall, split them with a rusted wedge found near the sand pit, and stacked the driest pieces over twisted paper from the county envelope. The first match failed. The second burned long enough to catch the paper, then the smallest branch. Smoke folded into the room, hesitated beneath the arch, and lifted. Elena watched it draw upward without spilling back. She set the galvanized bucket near the heat, filled it with well water, beans, and a pinch of salt Martin had wrapped in brown paper. By dusk, the beans had softened. She ate them with a wooden casting spoon, seated on an overturned mold box while the furnace warmed one side of her face. It was the first hot meal she had cooked in 43 days. Afterward, she entered the workroom with the lamp Martin had loaned her. The objects there were not arranged as ruins. They had been left in positions that implied interruption. A brass tuning fork rested beside a ledger turned face down. A hand-cranked boring bar still held a curl of green metal. 6 wooden strickle boards hung from pegs, each cut to the profile of a different bell. Beneath the bench lay a silvering hammer, a box of hardened rosin, 2 sets of calipers, a cracked graphite crucible, and a narrow lathe tool sharpened to remove metal from the inside of a bell without scoring its voice. On the back wall, behind a fallen furnace brick, Elena found a shallow cavity covered by warped oak boards. Inside were technical notebooks wrapped in oilcloth. Their pages described core construction in Silas's careful language. Brick laid dry at the center, clay tempered with horsehair, each layer allowed to stiffen before the next was applied. One margin carried a note about bell metal, roughly 4 parts copper to 1 part tin, poured near 1100 degrees Celsius, with impurities skimmed before the final lift of the crucible. Elena read until the lamp smoked, then she returned to the clapper. It was nearly 3 feet long, cast from dense bronze with a rounded striking bulb larger than her head. Green-black corrosion covered most of its surface. She rolled it away from the bench using a broken oak handle as a lever. The clapper moved reluctantly and settled with a deep vibration. Elena struck the shaft with the tuning fork. Most of the bronze answered with a hard, brief tone. Near the bulb, the sound changed. It became lower, almost hollow. She tested it again, then she measured the clapper's length, diameter, and approximate volume with twine and a carpenter's rule. Even allowing for the iron suspension eye, it weighed less than solid bronze should have weighed. Not much less. Enough. At the base of the bulb beneath oxidation, she found a circle no wider than a teacup saucer. It was not bronze. She cleaned the edge with lamp oil in the corner of a rag. Fine grain emerged, then a warm brown surface fitted so closely into the casting that corrosion had disguised it. Cedar, a disc, had been pressed into a recessed opening and coated with bronze dust and wax. Elena worked around its edge with the thinnest lathe tool. The wood did not lift. When she brushed away the last wax, 3 small holes appeared in a triangular pattern. She inserted the tips of the calipers, turned them together, and felt hidden threads release. The cedar disc rotated once, then again she removed it with both hands. Inside the clapper was a cylindrical chamber lined with oiled felt. Air came out carrying the scent of cedar, metal, and old paper. Elena placed the lamp on the floor. The first package was wrapped in waxed linen and tied with black thread. Inside lay 6 small heirloom tools: a bronze divider, a narrow chasing chisel, 2 tuning scrapers, a folding rule marked in eighths, and a polished silver hammer no longer than her palm. Its head was engraved with a ship caught between 2 waves. The second package contained metal ingots, each stamped with ratios rather than values: copper, tin, and a pale alloying bar wrapped separately with a warning written in faded ink. The third was a rectangular tin box. A folded letter rested on top. Elena did not open it. Beneath the letter were paper packets, cloth rolls, and coins stacked inside narrow wooden trays. She carried the box to the workbench, closed the shutters against the wind, and began counting. There were double eagles, worn silver Morgan dollars, Indian head cents, darkened almost black, and Massachusetts commemorative half-dollars sealed in paper sleeves. Some were common, others had dates Martin's old manual could not help her value. Between the trays lay banknotes wrapped in linen and a small velvet case holding a Purple Heart dated 1944. She counted once in silence, then a second time, writing each amount on the back of a mold diagram. The total was $49,600. Elena sat with both hands flat on the bench. The number did not make the roof whole. It did not clear the legal claims attached to Adrian's theft. It did not restore Silas's ledgers or return the apartment key her mother had left on the stair rail, but it changed the next morning. That was enough. She placed every coin back in its proper roll, returned the metal to its velvet case, and set the unopened letter beside the silver hammer. Then she carried a blanket through the rear door and walked beyond the walnut trees to the old mill channel. The water moved darkly beneath a skin of ice, slow at the center and quick along the stones. Elena stayed until the lamp in the Foundry window became the only warm color left in the field. She did not read the letter that night. The strongest sound does not come from shouting, but from what has been carefully made to ring true. Morning entered through the broken roof in a pale square and reached the workbench before it touched the floor. Elena warmed her hands over the furnace, then lifted the folded letter from the tin box. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and softened at the creases by being opened and closed many times before it was hidden. On the first line, the capital M leaned forward in the same narrow hand that had labeled Silas's old mold drawings. She sat down. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then you have opened the clapper without breaking it, which tells me more about you than a name could. An impatient person would have split the bronze." A careful one listened for the hollow place. "My name is Eleanor Ruth Marlowe." In March of 1978, Dr. Samuel Keating at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston told me that the illness in my lungs would not leave me enough years to restore this shop. I had already spent too many years believing time would wait politely. Our family came here through work. Nathaniel Marlowe cast harness bells in Dedham in 1841. His son Josiah entered the Canton works in 1868 and finished marine bells by hand. Josiah's daughter Ada learned tuning after her brother Thomas was killed at Bellow Wood in 1918. Ada taught my father, Silas Nathaniel Marlowe, born in 1924, and he taught me before silence settled between us. 4 generations held the same tools, though not always the same name over the door. The final paid casting left this foundry on September 14, 1946. The trade closed that evening. Afterward, the furnace remained cold for more than 30 years. There are things you must know if you mean to wake it. Build the core from dry brick and temper the clay with clean horsehair, 1 part hair to roughly 40 parts clay by loose volume. Let each coat stiffen overnight. Keep the false bell 1/4 inch smaller than the finished inner profile. For ordinary bell metal, begin near 4 parts copper to 1 part tin, but judge the melt by its surface, not the clock. Pour near 1100 degrees Celsius, and do not rush the skimming. Let a medium casting remain buried in sand for at least 48 hours before you expose it. A bell removed hot remembers the injury. The silver hammer belonged to Ada. Use it only for testing, never shaping. The money is not payment for finding this place. It is time. Spend it slowly enough that each dollar leaves evidence of honest work. Inheritance is not possession. It is the moment one worker leaves a tool sharp for hands not yet born. Behind the back door, beneath the 3rd walnut tree, you will find a granite marker bearing the Ship and Waves stamp. That tree marks the boundary Silas searched for. He never knew I had found the proof. I could not bring myself to contact him. Pride kept its hand on the door until illness made the distance permanent. If he is gone, I ask forgiveness from someone who cannot grant it. If you are his blood, know that he was never forgotten. If you are not, then perhaps care has made you kin enough. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Eleanor Ruth Marlowe. October 21, 1978, Elena reached the signature and did not move. The furnace shifted behind her with a small fall of ash. She read the letter again, more slowly, stopping at Silas's name and at the sentence Eleanor had written about pride. Then she folded the pages along their original creases, pressing each line with the side of her thumb so no new fold would be added. Outside, the ground had hardened overnight. She passed through the back door and counted the walnut trees from the building. The 3rd stood close to the old mill channel, its trunk divided shoulder-high into 2 dark limbs. Beneath leaves frozen into the soil, Elena found the edge of granite. She cleared it with Silas's folding rule. The marker was no larger than a loaf of bread. Cut into its face was the same ship between 2 waves engraved on the silver hammer. Below the mark, almost lost beneath lichen, were the letters J. Marlowe, finisher, and the date 1868. Eleanor had found the proof. Silas had died looking for it. Elena carried the silver hammer outside and set its head against the granite. She did not strike hard. 1 measured tap was enough. The sound was small and clear. It moved through the frozen roots, across the mill channel, and returned from the foundry wall with a second, fainter note. Elena lowered the hammer and stayed beside the marker until the cold entered her knees. On the walk back, she began counting the kindnesses that had carried her farther than money had. Mrs. Pemberton had kept the final dollar beneath her blotter and placed Silas's index card inside the deed envelope. Martin Hagan had opened a credit ledger for a woman whose only collateral leaned toward demolition. Helen Ward, the gray-haired volunteer at the Stoughton Church basement, had pressed 2 clean pairs of socks beneath Elena's blanket without asking questions. Amos Pike, the man in the orange cap on Revere Lane, had left a covered jar of well water beside the stone wall that morning, his black and white dog sitting guard until she noticed it. None of them had repaired her life. Each had made the next hour possible. Before this story moves forward, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they could not solve the larger trouble. A meal, a ride, a dry coat, a door held open at the right moment. Tell us about that person in the comments and say their name if you are able. Some kindnesses deserve to travel farther than the people who first offered them. That evening, Elena wrapped the coins again and returned them to the tin box. She placed Ada's silver hammer, Silas's folding rule, and Eleanor's letter beside her blanket. For the first time since the eviction, she slept without holding the canvas bag against her chest. The first snow arrived on December 2nd, 6 inches deep by noon, gathering inside the foundry through the broken north roof. Elena carried Martin's repair manual to the furnace and read the roofing chapter 3 times. The first reading told her what the author assumed. The second showed what he had omitted. By the third, she could picture the work in sequence. Strip the curled shingles, expose the rafters, sister the split timber, lay felt from eave to ridge, then shingle upward so every seam shed water rather than invited it. The damaged slope measured 22 feet by 38. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 14 bundles of asphalt shingles, 2 rolls of 15-pound felt, and nearly 12 pounds of roofing nails. Martin delivered the materials in his pickup and placed an old roofing hatchet on the workbench. "My brother carried this 30 years, he said. The handle had been worn pale where a thumb rested. Elena tried to refuse it. "Tools dislike drawers," Martin said, and left. Amos Pike arrived the next morning wearing a canvas coat patched at both elbows. He had roofed barns and mill houses before arthritis bent 2 fingers permanently toward his palm. When Elena asked his rate, he shook his head. "You cannot afford my worst work." He climbed the ladder anyway. They labored for 11 days. Elena sistered the weakened rafter with new lumber, bolting soundwood against old, while Amos taught her to snap a chalk line without wasting motion. He drove every roofing nail in 3 strokes: set, sink, finish. On the 4th morning, he tapped 1 nail with his hatchet. "That nail's proud." Elena reached for the hammer. "Pull it." She did. By December 14th, the final ridge cap lay straight beneath a colorless sky. Snow remained in the yard, but none had entered the building. Elena stood in the casting room during the next storm and listened to the roof hold. January exposed what fire had hidden. Bricks near the chimney crown were spalling, their faces peeling away in red scales. Mortar turned to powder beneath Elena's thumb. She dismantled the upper courses one at a time, numbering each reusable brick in chalk and carrying the fragments down in the galvanized bucket. The manual recommended Portland cement. Amos crossed out the paragraph. "Too hard," he said. "Old brick needs mercy." Martin ordered hydraulic lime, and Elena mixed it with sharp sand while using fire clay near the flue at a ratio of 1 part fire clay to 3 parts lime mortar. She dampened every brick before bedding it so the dry clay would not steal water from the joint. The work lasted 3 weeks in temperatures that seldom climbed above 28 degrees. Her bare hands gave better control than gloves, but went numb every 15 minutes. She learned to stop before clumsiness ruined a joint, warming her fingers over a small brazier before returning to the scaffold. Wind pulled at her coat while she reset the crown. Twice, fresh mortar froze at the edges and had to be removed. She built a canvas shelter around the upper stack and kept a lantern burning inside it through the coldest nights. On January 27th, Elena laid a small test fire in the furnace. Smoke rose through the repaired throat and disappeared cleanly above the chimney. None leaked into the casting room. Amos watched from the doorway, rubbed powdered mortar from his knuckle, and gave one slow nod. The floors revealed their grain only after the chimney was sound. Most of the boards were old white pine, fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails whose dark squares sat below layers of soot and oil. Elena reset the loose nails with a narrow punch, replaced 2 rotted planks near the rear door, and rented Martin's random orbit sander for $14 per day. She worked in 3 passes. 80 grit removed the grime but left the boards rough enough to catch the edge of her rag. 120 softened the circular marks. 220 brought the pine to a surface that felt warm beneath her palm, though the room remained cold. Dust entered every seam in her clothing. She sealed the doorways with damp sheets and emptied the sander bag outside, where pale flour rose against the snow. On the final morning of sanding, Elena woke before dawn and could not lift the machine. She carried a mug of hot water to the mill channel instead. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, gray body motionless above black legs. For nearly an hour, bird and woman watched the water. Elena did no work that day. The next morning she swept the rooms twice and wiped each board with mineral spirits. She laid 3 thin coats of oil, waiting between them and keeping the furnace low. After a 48-hour cure, the white pine deepened from dark honey toward mahogany, its old nail heads appearing like a measured constellation. For the first time, the foundry floor reflected the windows. There were 8 windows, 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked. The last retained a single original pane from 1788, faintly rippled and thicker along its lower edge. Elena cleaned that pane with warm water and a linen cloth. Preserving every wavering imperfection, she removed the others sash by sash. Old glazing came away in brittle strips. She softened stubborn sections with gentle heat, pulled the glazier's points, and bedded replacement glass in thin ribbons of DAP 33 putty. Martin showed her how to roll the compound between her palms, press it firmly into the rabbet, then draw the putty knife in one continuous stroke. The bevel had to meet the sight line from inside without rising above it. The sash cords had rotted to brown fibers. Elena replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over its pulley and fastening it to the iron counterweight with a figure-8 knot. When balanced correctly, the sash stayed wherever her hand released it. The 7th window fought her for half a day. One pulley had seized, and the weight pocket was packed with a mouse nest and 2 brass buttons. She cleaned the wheel with oil, reset its pin, and tried again. On the final window, Elena pressed the last glazier's point beneath the preserved 1788 pane. A chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch. It tilted its black-capped head toward the room, holding still while Elena smoothed the final line of putty. Then it lifted into the pale February air, leaving the branch trembling outside the restored glass. The walls near the chimney failed first. Behind the loose plaster, hand-split oak lath showed through in narrow gray ribs, some still carrying strands of horsehair from the original mix. Elena made 3 patches and watched each one crack before morning. The first was too rich with lime. The second dried too quickly. The third sagged because she had worked it too wet. Martin brought an old burlap sack from his barn. "My father saved horsehair for plaster," he said, "no reason except habit." Elena washed the hair, cut it into short lengths, and folded it into lime plaster until the mix held together on the hock. She pressed a scratch coat through the lath and scored it while damp. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick and cured beneath damp cloth for 72 hours. The finished coat was 1/8 inch, smoothed with a steel trowel only after the wall had begun to tighten. The final surface was not flawless. It carried shallow waves that caught the furnace light. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Vale, who owned a Dwyer's Cafe despite the old name above its door, began leaving paper bags on Elena's step every Tuesday. Doris wore red-framed spectacles and tied each bag with cotton string. Inside were heel slices of bread, bruised apples, or soup sealed in jars. Elena brought the empty jars back with coins. Doris pushed the money across the counter without counting it. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." In early March, a boy arrived on a blue Schwinn with one pedal wrapped in tape. Caleb Marsh was 16, narrow-shouldered, and carried a splitting maul across his handlebars. He spent 2 afternoons breaking fallen walnut limbs into stove lengths, stacking every piece with the bark facing upwards. Elena offered him $3. He tightened the cord around the final stack, my mother said. "About your grandfather." That was all he would explain. He rode home with the maul balanced across his back. Reverend Boyd passed the Foundry each morning at 7. He had a white beard cut square beneath his chin and walked with a polished black cane he never appeared to need. He tipped his hat whenever Elena worked outside. On the morning she began repointing the foundation, he stopped beside the granite marker, closed his eyes, and said, "Keep these hands steady." Then he continued down Revere Lane. Elena postponed the cellar until February 11th. The entrance lay beneath a trap-door behind the furnace, its iron ring buried under soot. 7 granite steps descended into a 12 by 15-foot room floored with fieldstone. The air smelled of wet earth and cold iron. Water had gathered along the north wall, but the central floor remained dry. A dressed granite slab occupied the center. Its surface bore the ship and waves mark, cut deeper than the boundary marker outside. Elena cleared the edges with a brush and found no hinges or lifting ring. The slab was too deliberate to be ordinary and too heavy to move without equipment. She did not lift it. Under the third step, her fingers found a small oak box wedged between stone and packed clay. Its lid opened on wooden pins. Inside lay a brass key with a bow shaped like a bell seen in profile and a tintype wrapped in linen. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the foundry in the summer of 1903. She wore a dark skirt, held a tuning scraper in one hand, and had Elena's narrow eyes and uneven left eyebrow. On the back, written in brown ink, were the words, "Ada Marlowe, daughter of Josiah, age 25, summer of 1903. Elena carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside Eleanor's letter. She did not know what had opened. Snow withdrew from the stone walls in gray strips. The creek grew loud with meltwater, and pale green catkins appeared on the walnut branches before the last shaded ice was gone. Elena spent March drying the cellar and April repairing benches. She did not attempt a full bell casting. The notebooks made clear that enthusiasm could ruin as much metal as neglect. She chose one common silver coin from the cache, sold it through a reputable dealer, and used only part of the proceeds for copper, tin, molding clay, and clean horsehair. Her first work would be small samples no wider than her palm. She would test shrinkage, porosity, and tone before trusting herself with a bell. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Elena completed her first ship's bell. It was not large enough for an ocean vessel. The mouth measured 14 inches and the crown fit beneath both her hands. She had built the core from dry brick and clay, turned the false bell against a wooden strickle board, and buried the mold upright in the sand pit. The alloy went into the cope near 1100 degrees Celsius, bright enough to erase shadows from the room. She left the casting buried for 48 hours. When the sand was removed, the bell emerged rough and dark, with a seam along its waist and one shallow flaw near the lip. Elena filed the seam, mounted the casting on the old lathe, and removed metal from the inner wall in patient fractions. Ada's silver hammer gave the final answer. The bell rang clear enough to reach the mill channel without harshness. By then, the foundry no longer looked rescued. It looked inhabited. The white pine floors had darkened beneath use. Restored sash windows held the winter light. Hand tools hung on outlines traced in pencil above the benches. The furnace bricks remained scarred, and Elena left one section of smoke-black wall untouched, so the room would not forget what fire had cost. The brass key waited on the mantel until the following spring. Elena had tested it on every cabinet, chest, and iron plate inside the building. None accepted it. On April 9th, while clearing dead vines from the oldest walnut tree, she found a green line beneath the bark at shoulder height. It was the edge of a bronze plate. The tree had grown around it until only a narrow crescent remained visible. Elena cleaned away loose bark without cutting living wood. At the center of the plate was a keyhole shaped to receive the bell-bowed key. It turned once. A shallow compartment opened inside a hollow that had healed around its edges. Within it rested a folded 48-star American flag wrapped in oilcloth and a note dated October 3, 1918. Ada had written it while her brother Thomas served with the Marines in France. She described the telegram arriving at the foundry, her father sitting beside the cooling pit without removing his leather apron, and the church bell across Canton sounding at sunset. Thomas had been killed at Belleau Wood months earlier, but official confirmation reached the family late. Ada's note did not speak of glory. It asked that the flag be kept near the workshop because Thomas had spent his last winter helping her tune a bell whose note would guide fishing vessels through coastal fog. He had believed useful sound was a better memorial than stone. The Purple Heart from the clapper had been issued in his name after the medal's creation and placed with the family cache years later. On June 6th, Elena carried the medal, a small wreath, and a photograph of Ada to the Massachusetts National Cemetery in Bourne. Thomas's remains were not buried there, but his name had been entered into a family memorial record maintained by the Veterans Office. Elena stood beneath a light rain on the anniversary of the Normandy landings and asked that the medal be documented and preserved with his service history. There was no ceremony. A clerk in a navy cardigan signed the receipt, placed the velvet case in an archival box, and thanked her for bringing him home on the paper. Elena used 4 coins from the cash. 1 paid for the first roof materials after independent appraisal. 1 covered the chimney lime and fire clay. 1 purchased the copper and tin for her testing year. The 4th funded a legal review that separated the property from the debts Adrian had created through fraudulent documents. The remaining coins, notes, and metal records went back into the tin box. She lined the chamber inside the clapper with fresh felt, added copies of the deed and repair ledger, and sealed the cedar disc again. On the first page of the ledger, she wrote, "For the next one." The Foundry reopened without an announcement. Doris placed an index card on the cafe corkboard between a notice for piano lessons and a photograph of a missing tabby. Hand-finished bells, repairs accepted, Revere Lane. The first order came from the widow who needed a cracked porch bell repaired. The second came from a fishing family in Gloucester. By autumn, Elena's mailing list held 43 names, most written in pencil by customers who had heard about the shop from someone else. She worked slowly. Some months, she completed only 1 bell. Repairs paid more reliably than new castings, and she kept them ahead of ambition. People mailed school bells, dinner bells, and tarnished marine bells wrapped in towels. Elena returned each with a card describing the repair and 1 sentence about its voice. Caleb came back in October, taller, and carrying a long board beneath his arm. He had carved a sign from walnut salvaged after a storm. The old shop name appeared across the first line in restrained letters, Marlowe Bell Founders. Below it, in smaller carving, he had added, "Daughter Selina ran her thumb across the final word. There are no daughters," she said. Caleb set the sign against the bench. His taped bicycle pedal had been replaced, but he still carried the same splitting maul. There might be. They hung the sign above the restored doors before noon. Doris brought coffee. Martin stood in the lane with his hands inside his coat. Reverend Boyd tipped his hat and offered no prayer this time. The sign did not draw crowds. It faced the walnut trees and the road, which was enough. That winter, Elena began a letter. She used Eleanor's thick cream paper and Ada's folding rule to keep the margins straight. The opening came without revision. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote about the roof, the clapper, and the first bell that had carried its note to the mill channel. She listed the repairs still unfinished and warned that the cellar slab remained unopened. She included alloy tests that had failed, temperatures that had worked, and the exact place Martin's roofing hatchet tended to loosen at the handle. She did not describe the money as a gift, she called it time. Near the end, Elena carried the letter into the casting room and struck the newest bell once with the silver hammer. The strongest sound does not come from shouting, but from what has been carefully made to ring true. The note passed through the restored windows, crossed the frozen yard, and faded among the walnut trunks. Elena folded the letter and placed it inside the tin box. Not because she intended to leave, but because careful people prepare before they must. At dusk, she closed the furnace draft and stood beneath the walnut sign while snow began to cover Revere Lane. The brass ship's bell foundry waits. It has always waited. In the clerk's office, Mrs. Pemberton still kept Elena's final dollar beneath the corner of her blotter. The bill had gone soft along its folds. Each January, when the land records were balanced, she moved it into the new desk drawer and placed Silas Marlowe's old index card beside it. Neither item appeared in the county ledger. Both had been kept.